Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a world that's, well, pretty tiny today, SmartDust.
SmartDust.
I've got some articles and stuff from Wikipedia here.
Yeah.
And these tiny sensors, they're practically invisible to the naked eye, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they could change everything. We're talking healthcare, environmental monitoring, you name it.
Absolutely.
So are you ready to kind of like dust off this topic and get into it?
Let's do it.
Okay, so before we talk about the smart part, like, what is this dust?
Well, imagine a tiny computer, and I mean tiny, smaller than a grain of rice,
Wow.
packed with sensors, a way to power itself, and it can even talk wirelessly.
No way.
That's essentially SmartDust. Each particle, they call them motes, can pick up information about what's around, like the temperature, how bright it is, pressure, even chemicals.
That is amazing. But how did anyone even think of this? Was it always supposed to be this small?
It's interesting, actually. It started back in the early 90s, and it wasn't really about being small at first. It was more about sensing things everywhere.
So these researchers at Rand Corporation, they were brainstorming ways to collect data from really hard-to-reach places, right?
Right.
And that's where the idea of tiny, like, independent sensors came from.
Uh-huh.
Then DARPA, the U.S. military research folks,
Yeah.
they saw the potential for, well, things like spying on the battlefield.
Yeah.
So in 1997, there was this big moment where researchers from UC Berkeley, they proposed making these sensor nodes less than a cubic millimeter. Can you believe it?
Hold on, less than a cubic millimeter. Like, how is that even possible?
Well, think about it. In the last few decades, we've gotten insanely good at making things small. Computer chips,
Right.
So we can make computer chips unbelievably tiny.
Mm-hmm.
And we're using that same tech for SmartDust, fitting all that function into these little devices.
Okay, now I'm starting to really get how tiny these things are. But you said they're not just sensors, right? What else is squeezed into a SmartDust mote?
Right, so each mote needs its own power.
Yeah.
It needs to chat with other motes or a central hub.
And it needs to process the data from the sensors, right?
Got it.
So besides the sensors, you've got a tiny power source. Could be a micro battery, sometimes even a little solar panel.
Wow.
Then there's the communication system using radio waves. And of course, the microcontroller, which is like the brain of the mote.
So you're telling me all of that fits into something smaller than a grain of rice. I bet there are tons of engineering problems at that size.
You're telling me. Power is a big one. These motes need to run for a long time on tiny batteries. Then communication, well, small antenna, short range. And the microcontroller needs to do all this processing, manage the communication, and fit in a tiny space.
It sounds like making things tiny is the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
But you said it's already being used. So how are researchers solving all these problems?
Right, and this is where it gets interesting. We're seeing crazy new ideas for designing SmartDust. For example, new battery materials that can store more energy in a smaller space. Or even better, harvesting energy from the environment itself. Things like vibrations, temperature changes, you name it.
That's smart.
It is.
Okay, but why even bother with SmartDust? What's the point of it all?
Well, think about the possibilities. Imagine a network of these sensors on a bridge watching for tiny cracks.
Okay,
We could catch problems way before they become dangerous, right?
that's a good point.
Or think about air quality in a city. We could get real-time data at street level.
Wow.
That means we could do something about pollution hotspots immediately.
Those are some pretty impressive applications. So is any of this happening now, or is it all in the future?
It's both. While we're still waiting for it to be everywhere, there are some amazing real-world examples. Like at UC Berkeley, they're working on this thing called neural dust.
Wait, neural dust, what is that?
They're implanting tiny sensors directly on the brain.
On the brain. Sounds like science fiction.
It does, but this could be huge for treating brain disorders. These sensors, they sit on the surface or even inside the brain tissue and record brain activity. It's like having a window into how the brain works.
That is mind-blowing. Okay, but before we go too deep into brains, let's go back to SmartDust in general. You mentioned the environment and infrastructure. What other areas could it be used in?
Okay, think about agriculture. Imagine sensors all over a farm, checking soil moisture, nutrients, pests, even diseases. Farmers could get up-to-the-minute information about their crops, optimize everything, and grow more food using less resources.
So it's like SmartDust could help us solve world hunger.
It could play a part, definitely, and there's industry too.
Oh, right, like factories and stuff.
Exactly. Imagine using SmartDust to keep an eye on factory machines.
Yeah.
We could catch tiny changes in vibration or temperature that could mean a problem before it breaks down.
That's brilliant.
It is. It could save money and make things way more efficient.
So SmartDust could change almost everything. But before we get carried away, what about the downsides? Are there any concerns about using this tech everywhere?
That's a good point. Every powerful technology has its risks. And with SmartDust, well, one of the big ones is privacy. Think about billions of these little, practically invisible sensors collecting data on everything, even on us. What if that data falls into the wrong hands?
That's a scary thought. So it's not just building the tech, it's also about making sure it's used for good.
Exactly. And that brings us to a big question. How do we make sure SmartDust doesn't become a problem? How do we balance the amazing potential with our need for privacy?
That's a tough question. And honestly, it's one that we'll need to answer together as a society.
Yeah.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about. This is just the beginning of our deep dive into SmartDust, but we've covered a lot of ground. The origins, how it works, potential applications, and the challenges ahead. And there's still so much more to uncover.
There is.
We talked about some incredible things SmartDust can do, but obviously there's some big ethical questions we need to think about, like how do we make sure this technology doesn't turn into something we regret later?
Yeah, that's a big question, and researchers and policymakers are trying to figure it out right now. One idea is to build in safeguards from the start.
Okay, what do you mean?
So some people are working on SmartDust systems that are designed for privacy, right? The data they collect is either anonymous or scrambled, so it can't be traced back to a person.
That makes sense. But wouldn't that make the data less useful? If you can't connect it to a specific person or place, what good is it?
That's true. It's about finding the right balance, you know? For some things, like monitoring a bridge, anonymous data might be enough.
Right, I get that.
But for other stuff, like healthcare, you might need to know exactly who the data is from.
So where do we draw the line? Who gets to decide that?
That's the tricky part. We need to talk about it openly as a society. What are we willing to give up? Do we choose privacy over, say, catching diseases early? These are tough questions with no easy answers.
Yeah, no easy answers. So it sounds like we need some serious regulations, some ethical rules to deal with all this.
Exactly. We got to make sure SmartDust is used for everyone, not just a few. That means clear rules about who gets the data, how they can use it, and what happens if someone misuses it.
It feels like this is bigger than just SmartDust. This is about technology becoming part of everything, our lives, our environment, everything.
Absolutely. SmartDust is just one example. We see it with smart homes, wearable devices, the Internet of Things, all of it. As this stuff becomes more common, we need to be even more careful about the ethical side.
It's like we're entering a new world where it's hard to tell what's physical and what's digital anymore.
That's a great way to put it. It's exciting and kind of scary at the same time. We could use technology to make everything better, but we need to watch out for the downsides.
Okay, let's get back to SmartDust for a second. We talked about privacy, but what other challenges do we need to think about?
Security is a big one. Billions of these tiny devices, all connected. That's a huge target for hackers.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We need strong security to keep SmartDust networks safe from attacks.
I can imagine. Someone hacking into sensors on a power grid or a traffic system, that could be a disaster.
Exactly. And it's hard to physically protect these things. They're tiny, spread out everywhere. We need to design them with security built in from the ground up.
So it's not just about keeping them safe from being tampered with. We also need to protect the data they send wirelessly.
You got it. We need encryption, authentication, all of that to make sure the data from SmartDust is secure.
With all these challenges, is this even practical? Can we really use SmartDust on a large scale, like we've been talking about?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And honestly, it depends. There are big hurdles, but researchers are making amazing progress.
What kind of progress? Anything that makes you optimistic?
Definitely. Power management is one. We talked about that earlier, how it's a big challenge.
Right, yeah.
But researchers are coming up with new batteries, smaller, longer lasting, more efficient.
Okay, that's good news. But eventually, wouldn't you have to replace those batteries? And how do you even do that with something that small?
That's where energy harvesting comes in. What if these sensors could power themselves from their surroundings? Vibrations, temperature changes, light, things like that.
You mean they could just keep running forever?
That's the dream. It's not easy, but the progress in energy harvesting is incredible.
That's wild. Sounds like we're close to some big breakthroughs with this tech.
I think so. And it's not just power. There's progress in communication, data processing. We're finding new ways for SmartDust to talk to each other, process data, all with very little power.
Amazing. So the tech problems are getting solved. But what about the ethical stuff? Any progress there?
It's an ongoing conversation. As more people learn about SmartDust, the conversation about ethics grows. Researchers, policymakers, ethicists, they're all coming together to figure out the rules for using this technology the right way.
That's good to hear. Sounds like we're moving in the right direction.
I think so. It's complicated, but I'm hopeful. I think we can use SmartDust to do good in the world while minimizing the risks.
Thinking about all these uses for SmartDust, one thing keeps popping into my head. How do we actually get these things out there? We're talking billions of tiny sensors. How do you even spread them around?
That's a great question. And there are a few ideas floating around.
Really? Like what?
One is using airplanes or drones, like crop dusters. Imagine them releasing clouds of smart dust over an area.
Okay, yeah.
Efficient, but you got to think about the wind, the weather, making sure it lands in the right spot. Researchers are working on that.
So what else is there?
Another idea is to put smart dust right into materials we already use. Concrete for bridges, asphalt for roads, things like that.
So the sensors would be built into the infrastructure itself.
Exactly. No need to spread them separately, and you get constant monitoring of those structures.
Smart.
It is. There's also research into using biological carriers, like insects or birds.
Wait, you're saying we could send bugs out with tiny sensors?
It sounds crazy, but it could work. Imagine using insects with SmartDust to monitor a rainforest or track endangered animals. The possibilities are pretty wild.
That's incredible. So we've talked about the uses, the challenges, the ethics, even deployment. But where is all of this going? 5, 10, 20 years down the line, where do you see SmartDust?
It's tough to say for sure, but I think SmartDust is going to become a big part of our lives. We're already seeing it in different areas, and as the technology gets better, the uses will only grow.
Paint me a picture. What does a future with SmartDust look like?
Imagine cities with smart dust networks everywhere. They monitor air quality, traffic, everything. Imagine farmers using it to grow more food with less water. Imagine doctors using it to track patients' health in real time, giving them treatments before they even get sick.
It sounds like technology would be woven into every part of life.
Exactly. I believe smart dust can make our lives safer, healthier, more efficient, more sustainable.
It's a pretty exciting vision. But we can't forget about the risks, right? We need to make sure SmartDust benefits everyone.
Absolutely. It's a powerful technology, and we need to use it responsibly.
As we've been talking about all this, one thing we haven't really dug into is neural dust. You mentioned it before, and it sounds like something out of a movie.
It does, right? But as I said, it's real, and it could change how we understand the brain and revolutionize healthcare.
So remind me, what exactly is it?
Neural dust is like tiny wireless sensors that you can put in the brain. They're so small, you can inject them with a syringe.
Oh.
And once they're in there, you can use them to monitor brain activity, stimulate neurons, even deliver drugs directly to the brain.
Wait, deliver drugs? How is that even possible?
Researchers have figured out how to put tiny drug reservoirs in these neural dust particles. You can activate them to release the drugs on demand, targeted to a specific spot in the brain.
That's amazing. What are the uses for something like that?
Oh, the possibilities. Neural dust could treat all sorts of brain disorders like Parkinson's, epilepsy, Alzheimer's. It could even help paralyzed people move again by bypassing damaged nerves.
So we're talking about potentially curing some serious conditions.
Exactly. And that's not all. We could use it to really understand how the brain works. By monitoring activity at such a small scale, we could learn so much about how we think, how we feel, how we behave.
That's incredible. But honestly, it kind of freaks me out a little. Putting sensors in people's brains. That brings up some serious ethical questions.
I hear you. It's definitely something to be cautious about. This is powerful technology, and we need to be careful how we use it.
What kind of ethical stuff are you worried about?
Privacy is a big one. If these sensors can read our thoughts and feelings, who gets to see that information? And what will they do with it?
That's a good point. That data needs to be protected, just like our medical records or our finances.
Absolutely. And what about misuse? Could someone use neural dust to control people's thoughts, their behavior? Could it be used for spying or even worse? These are questions we need to face as this technology develops.
This is getting into some really deep ethical territory.
It is, and we need to have these discussions now, before it's too late. We need rules, ethical guidelines to make sure neural dust is used for good.
Well said. Neural dust could be amazing, but it could also be dangerous. We need to be careful and responsible.
Couldn't agree more. This tech could change what it means to be human. We need to approach it with excitement, but also with caution.
This deep dive has been incredible. We've learned so much about SmartDust, from the possibilities to the challenges to the ethical questions about neural dust, but there's still more to explore. Okay, so let's step back for a minute and think big picture. We've talked about all the amazing things SmartDust could do, but what would a world filled with these tiny sensors actually look like? How would it change things for everyone?
That's a question a lot of people are talking about. Some imagine a future where smart dust turns our cities into like these super smart ecosystems.
Okay, interesting.
Think about it, buildings that automatically adjust their energy use depending on who's inside.
Wow, that would be cool.
Right. Traffic systems that optimize flow based on what's happening in each area. Smart dust could even help us predict natural disasters, potentially saving lives.
That sounds pretty amazing, almost utopian. But, there's always another side to the coin. What about the possibility of being watched all the time? Could SmartDust be used to create a society where we have zero privacy?
That's a very real concern. We can't ignore it. The potential for misuse is there, and we have to put things in place to stop smart dust from becoming a tool for oppression.
So what can we do?
Well, we need strong rules and ethical guidelines for using smart dust. Who gets to see the data? How can they use it? What are the consequences if someone breaks the rules? We need to answer all those questions.
Okay, so laws and regulations. But isn't that only part of the solution?
Definitely. It's also about creating a culture of responsible innovation. People need to understand the risk of smart dust and demand that it's used ethically.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
We need to talk openly and honestly about the implications of this technology and bring everyone into the conversation. Scientists, engineers, ethicists, policymakers, and regular people. Everyone.
It reminds me of the early days of the internet. Everyone was excited about the potential, but worried about the risks.
Yeah.
It took time for society to figure things out, the norms, the rules.
Exactly. We're at a similar point with smart dust. It's up to us to shape how it's used. Do we want a world where smart dust makes our lives better and empowers us, or do we let it turn into a tool for surveillance and control?
Wow, that's a powerful way to put it. It really is a choice we have to make. So let's say we do figure out the ethical side. What could the future of SmartDust look like? Give us a glimpse of what's possible.
Imagine healthcare that's personalized and proactive. You have smart dust sensors in your body, monitoring your health constantly.
Okay.
They detect problems early on, even before you have symptoms, and you get treatment right away.
That would revolutionize healthcare. But what about other areas? What else could SmartDust change?
What about environmental sustainability? We could use smart dust to protect our planet in ways we never thought possible. Sensors tracking deforestation, monitoring air and water quality, helping us predict natural disasters.
That would be incredible. But let's be realistic for a second. This all sounds expensive. Will only rich people be able to benefit from SmartDust?
That's a fair question. The good news is the cost of smart dust is going down as technology improves and production gets more efficient. So over time, it should become more affordable for everyone.
That's good to know. So we've covered a lot today. The benefits, the risks, the ethical concerns, and the future of SmartDust. Before we wrap things up, I'm curious about your personal take. What excites you the most about SmartDust, and what worries you?
Honestly, what excites me is the potential to solve some of the world's biggest problems. Climate change, healthcare, global security. Smart dust could make a difference in all of those areas.
That's amazing.
But what keeps me up at night is the thought that we might mess it up. That will let fear and greed control how this technology is used. That will end up creating a world that's less free, less fair.
That's a sobering thought.
It is.
It's a reminder that innovation comes with responsibility. We can't just focus on the cool tech stuff. We have to think about the consequences and work together to make sure SmartDust benefits everyone.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. This deep dive into SmartDust has been fascinating, and I hope our listeners have learned a lot about this incredible technology. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. It's been a great conversation.
And to our listeners, keep those brains buzzing, stay curious, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive into the world of emerging technologies.